I think when you have that desire to serve the Lord and be involved in the church, it's your very life. Bill particularly thought that we should be in church every Sunday, even when we traveled. We were always in church somewhere. And that was just a desire of his heart, to be in this church and to serve the Lord wherever he could.
I sat in Bill's Sunday school class for several years, and I just admired him and his wife and family so much.
Bill Johnson, I know I was superintendent of junior high and had been several years, and Melba decided to go to this guy by the name of Bill Johnson's Berean class. At that time they had about maybe 12 members. And Melba came home and she said, I think it's time you went to Sunday school and listened to this man. And I sat and listened to Bill Johnson for 30 years, and he impacted hundreds of lives that went through his class.
Bill, of course, I think the main thing in his life was that he was the building chairman when we tore down the old church and built this 3-story building. And he loved what he was doing. Somebody asked him how long it had been since he walked through the church as they were building it. He says, well, I haven't been there since noon. And he just loved building buildings anyway. And he really, the contractor that built this church told me one day that this church would never know how much money he saved them, as they were only going to build, they were going to build 3 stories but only finish the bottom layer, and they ended up finishing all 3.
Buddy wasn't a relative, but I wish he were. I had the highest regard for Buddy and his wife. And one thing about Buddy, every morning he'd go to work like 5:30 or 6. He would stop by the church, go in the auditorium. This was our first building. And he would go in there and pray every morning before he would start the day. And I was most impressed with that.
Buddy was a deacon, and Buddy he didn't live too many blocks from the church, but he was involved in everything the church does. Buddy was a tremendous fellow deacon, and anything that your church was involved in, Buddy was right there to see that it get done and gave his 100% support.
My recollection of Buddy Price was when my mother was in the nursing home. He came and she was asleep, and he wrote a little card to her, and I still have that card today about how he loved her and how important he was. And Jewel, his wife, was in my Sunday school class for a long time, and they were a special couple.
Daddy Frank, you know, I'm a World War II veteran, and he was a radio man, I understand, for General Patton, and everybody kidded him about it, but he was such a wonderful guy, very jovial, and pastor every once in a while would even mention Daddy Frank always gave more than his 10%. 15 and 20 wasn't out of the question. But I can still see his face today. You know, in my 60-odd years in this church, he stands out there with some of the best.
Frank Otard came to our church and immediately got involved with the youth. And you could talk to some of them and they would say Frank led them down the right path. And he gave a lot of his time. And in later years, after he retired, he would come down to church and hang around to see if anything he could do.
Well, Ethel Hotard was a sweet lady, very sweet, and everybody loved her to death, and they were just, they were crazy about each other, and they were sure avoiding her life when Daddy Frank left, and it was avoiding all of our lives when she left.
Jackson was, he and I were deacons together for, gosh, I don't know how long. And we went through one of the situations with our church in that at one time the state convention of the state Baptist, because we were having different kind of baptism and open communion, and they decided not to permit our messengers, it happened down in Hot Springs, to vote, and this upset the members of the church. And when they heard about it at the next business meeting, it came up that, you know, if they won't let our messengers vote, then why do we give them money? You know, we're giving them money and they control the money. And A.D. Robbins was a fine gentleman, and he was a tremendous asset to the church, background and what have you. And he told a story one night in the business meeting while we were discussing. He said, you know, a farmer has a pond that gets muddy and dirty and what have you, and the only way that he can get that pond to clean up is just let it sit a while. Lady made the motion, and why don't we just put this money in an escrow account and kind of let our feelings settle a little bit, and then see what we can do with it later on. It made sense to us, and so we started putting that money into an escrow account. And sometime after that, Neil Jackson, who was out to BSU at that time doing a tremendous job, and he got up one evening during a business meeting and he said, you know, that money was set aside by the church to help these college students, and one part of it to help the college students and all the other stuff. And while that money is sitting there in the escrow account, we're not helping the students, and we're not helping the other outreach of the Southern Baptist Convention. And he said, I think what we need to do is just go ahead and put that money back at work and see that this mission part of our church continues. And at that time, the church agreed with him, and we went ahead and started using that money and putting it back into the Southern Baptist Convention so all of his outreach could go ahead and be taken care of. So that's the way we took care of that.
Neil was the backbone of this church. I mean, he was he loved the Southern Baptist Convention, and he was very much leading our church to be part of the convention.
Jim Niven was the same. He just was a large man, had a southern accent that was out of this world, and when he spoke, people really listened. And I remember him as probably, in my opinion, one of the finest deacons we ever had in this church.
One of the people that was so involved in the church, and Bob Headinga was, as far as I know, is the first actual administrator the church hired. But our church was getting big enough at that time, and we were relying on the pastor to be the business person and train the people and what have you. And I think the church took a step forward when we went ahead and hired Bob Heading. Bob had worked in a hospital group and he knew how to run businesses and what have you. And our church was getting big enough that we needed somebody to help. I can recall about Bob, and it was at that time the church had bought, the church knew at that time the church didn't have any of this surrounding property. We owned the building, the lot that the building was in, and we felt like we needed to grow. So we found a lady here in Russellville that had 60 acres that we could buy, and we could buy that 60 acres over in the main part of Russellville, the residential area, for about $300,000. And we went ahead and agreed to do that, and we got a loan and we paid that off. And we had an architect looking at that, and after we put our views and ideas into what we wanted on this property and the buildings, it came up to I think it's over $15 million. And our membership at that time was just not capable of handling that. So we decided to get another architect's deal. What could we do downtown? And he came up with an idea that we could have as many church buildings here on our present property as we had out there, and it would be between $4 and $6 million. And for the difference, we decided to go ahead and sell that property out there and start building down here. A couple of the things that we did, and Tom Walker was very much in this, we started buying little properties all around as they came available. One property had a fire in it. We bought that, and right now we have about 4 major blocks right here in the city. But we agreed to go ahead and sell that property out there and put our money back in here. And it's kind of interesting. We had a vote one time, and the people of the church at a business meeting agreed that we should sell for about 51 and about 51% thought we ought to sell. And our pastor at that time, Stephen Davis, thought that it really wasn't that strong enough, and he said, why don't we wait until we have a better vote on that? And so we did, and it's kind of interesting. About a year after that, I came down, and for some reason, the reason I was on a committee, and I mentioned to Bob that maybe it's time that we sell that thing, and he said, Hank, you won't believe it. Yesterday I had a guy come in here, and he offered us $335,000 for that property, which would give us our money back plus the interest on it. And you know, we took that back to the church, and with a new deal about staying downtown and being a downtown church, the membership voted on it by a large margin, and that's the way that we're probably downtown now as a downtown church, and one of the larger ones. You know, Bob did a good job for us.
Those people with their lives had such a great influence on we that were younger and coming up. We had somebody to look forward to, somebody to ask for help, and I just thank them so much.